All right, so today we are going to go over a pretty common interview question in JavaScript. It's called FizzBuzz. You might have heard of it, you might have not, but let's go ahead and begin. So essentially, it's a problem that most people run into during interviews, and essentially if a number is divisible by 3, you want it to say fizz. If it's divisible by 5, you want it to say buzz. And if it's divisible by 3 and 5, you want it to say FizzBuzz. So let me just go ahead and, can you see the screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So divisible by 3, say fizz. Divisible by 5, say buzz. And divisible by 3 and and 5, say FizzBuzz. Okay, so have you touched JavaScript at all?
Yeah, I got through. I'm at the final project stage right now, actually.
Okay, perfect. So if I were to give you this problem, what would be your first approach to it?
I would make a function out of that.
Okay, you would make a function. Okay. So function, let's say, what kind of function? What would this function do?
I would say function divide numbers.
Okay, divide numbers. And would you pass any parameters into it?
Yeah, since there's numbers, the 3 and 5.
Okay, so let's just call it number 1, number 2. So that way it could work for any numbers, right? If I want it to be like 7 and 6, we could do that, right? It doesn't always have to be 3 and 5.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we have our functions set up, and now we need to check to see if they're divisible by these numbers. So what, how would we go about that? We need to check if it is or not, right? So that means usually true or false, right?
Yes,
So,
some form of Boolean data.
right, so then that usually pertains to a condition that we're checking, which then falls back to like an if statement. So what we can do is we can set up some if statements to see if they are divisible by these numbers, right?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. So if something is divisible by number 1, so that means we have to have another parameter in there. What are we checking is divisible by 3 and 5, right?
Yeah.
So we need one more parameter, and we can call it, let's see, we can call it check number. Okay, so we can check if number is divisible, and we use modulus. And do you know how modulus works?
No.
Okay, so basically what it does is it divides the second number, the first number by the second number, and it returns the remainder. So if something is divisible by that number, it's going to return 0 because the remainder is 0. So when we do this, we need to compare to see if what this comes out to be is 0. So we're checking to see if the number is divisible by number 1, then we're going to go ahead and console.log Fizz. And we might put the number with it too. So I'll just do check number plus fizz. That way we have the number next to the word fizz. So far, so good?
Kind of. I'm pretty lost. JavaScript has not been a fun thing for me.
Okay, no worries. So where are we lost in this?
Virtually everywhere when the if statements start.
Okay, so right around, so we're fine, you're fine with defining the function, right?
Yeah, defining the function and the parameters and setting the variables I can do, but I can't
Okay,
seem to get the functions to do what I want.
okay. So with this function, we are checking to see if they're divisible by certain numbers. So we need the number that we're passing in and then the two numbers that we're checking to see if they're divisible by. So here we are, when we're checking for something and we need a return of true or false, that's kind of where an if statement comes into play, because how if statement works is if, and what we write in the parentheses is what we're checking. What's in the parentheses is going to return either a true or a false. If it returns a true, then whatever we write inside of these curly brackets is going to be what happens. So what we're checking is to see if the number passed in, let's say 10, is divisible by 3. So if I were to call this function divide numbers and I passed in 10, 3, and 5, we're saying 10 modulus 3. So what that's doing, it's 10 divided by 3. So 3 goes into 10 3 times, but there's still a remainder of 1 because 3 times 3 is 9. So we still have a remainder of 1. So what modulus is going to return is that number 1. And we're checking to see if that number is equivalent to 0. Since it's not, we're going to skip what's in these curly brackets and move on to the next statement. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, essentially the function is going to check if there's any remainder of a number after it's ran, and if it is, it's going to return the remainder.
Right, that's what this is doing right here.
What is console.log check number plus fizz?
So console.log, I'm saying if this is divisible by 3, then on my console, which is down here, I want it to print out the number with the word fizz.
Okay, so you're just calling the function with that?
Well, I'm calling the function here. So console.log is just a way for us to write onto our console. It's kind of just like a debugging tool to see what's going on. It's not like on the browser or anything like that. It's just kind of a check. So let's, I'll just keep going and then that we'll run a few so you can see how it works. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to check if the check number is divisible by the second number, let's say 5. So I'm going to say else if check number modulus number 2 is equivalent to 0, then I want it to say buzz, right? Because if it's divisible by 5, I say buzz. So I'm going to console.log check number plus buzz. Okay. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to check if it's divisible by both, right? So else if check number is, so you can basically just steal both of them and put an and in between because we want them to be divisible by both. The way you do that is with 2 ampersands. So if you need 2 things to be true, then you just put an and in between. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. There is a mistake in this that I put on purpose. So let's see if you can see what it is. But let's go ahead and run this a couple times. Let's say divide numbers. Let's do 9, 3, and 5. Let's do, run this for a few numbers here. We'll have 20, 3, and 5, and then we'll do 15. Okay, so before I run it, what should we expect from these? If I run this one, what would you expect my output to be?
If 1, else if 1, 0, else if 2, 1, 0.
Where are you getting 1, 0?
It's asking for, it's going to give me the remainder of the division problem, correct?
No, so that's not what the whole function is doing. The whole function is just going to return FizzBuzz or FizzBuzz if it's divisible by these numbers, right? The only thing that is returning the remainder is this portion right here, because we're checking to see if it is divisible by that number. So this little chunk right here is returning the remainder, and we're checking that remainder to 0. So let's say I had 4 and 2. 4 divided by 2 gives me a remainder of 0. So 0 is equal to 0. So then I'm going to console.log for Fizz. So here, if I'm doing 10 and 3 and 5, I'm checking to see if 10 is divisible by 3. The remainder of that is 1, which is not equal to 0. So we skip all of this code and we jump down to here. And we're checking to see, okay, is 10 divisible by 5? The remainder of that is 0. So 0 does equal 0 here. So this code is going to run. So we get buzz. So we should expect 10 buzz on this one.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
And on
So
the bottom one, would we expect buzz again?
For the last one?
Yes.
For this one right here. For that one, let's run it. So 15 divided by 3, what's the remainder on that?
Oh, I'm sorry. There is no remainder on that.
Right, it's 0. So we would get Fizz, right? We would get 15 Fizz. But that's not what we want there. We want 15 Fizz buzz. So I wrote this code incorrectly on purpose. So what could I do to make sure that this last one gives us Fizz buzz? Hint is just a rearrangement of our if statements.
Of our what statement, I'm sorry?
Our if statements, if we rearrange it in a certain way, we would get the correct result. Because the way that if statements work, if the first case works, it's going to do that and skip the rest. So what we want to do is check if it's divisible by both first. So then that would move this. So we could just move this to be our first thing. And then we can move this down here. And we just flipped it around. So we're checking to see if the number is divisible by both numbers first. Because if it's divisible by both numbers first, and we're just checking to see if it's divisible by one number first, it's always going to run that and not check to see if it's divisible by that second number, even if it is. So the order matters here, especially with if statements, because as soon as one true hits, it's going to go with that and skip all the rest of the if statements. So for this example here, we want to check if it's divisible by 3 and 5 first. That way we can do FizzBuzz, and then if not, we'll check the other numbers by themselves. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, it has to see if it can run both before it does them individually.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and run this. Let me save this. And that way we can see our results. Oops. All right, so let's take a look here and make sure is what we expected. So 10 is divisible by 5, so that's why we got a buzz. 9 is divisible by 3 and not 5, that's why we got a fizz. 20 is divisible by only 5, so we got a buzz there. And 15 is divisible by both, so we have a fizz buzz. I promise you, you will run into this question in interviews, especially if you're interviewing for JavaScript. So definitely take the time to be familiar with it. And super bonus points for making it into a function, because you could have just gone into straight of an if statement, but putting it into a function means that you're making it more general and you could work with any number. So if they asked you to change the numbers to 6 and like 13, that's easy. You're just passing in different parameters. So great thinking on making it a function. A lot of people won't jump into the function immediately. So you would definitely get bonus points in an interview for just going straight into a function. So I applaud you on that move. Do you have any questions? So on any of the material, the if statements, functions, how it worked?
How are you calling that?
So the way that you call a function is you write down the function name with some parentheses. If there are parameters to go into the function, which are these right here, then you must provide it with parameters, and then you just put a semicolon. So here I'm saying, hey, go to the divide numbers function. And then what's cool about VS Code is it tells you the parameters if you hover over it. So you put in the parameters, put your semicolon. So what it does, it comes up here to the function, and then it makes check number 10, makes number 1 3, and number 2 5. So it is passed in respectively. And then it goes ahead and performs whatever you put inside of the function. So here it'd be 10 modulus 3 and 10 modulus 5 and so forth.
So when I throw in the variables and the parameters up there, I can use the name of the function and then put in multiple times different parameters and get different results for each one.
Yeah, definitely. You can think of a function as kind of like a machine, right? You can put different inputs and it spit out different outputs, but it's doing the same thing in the machine. It's like when you're at an ATM and you want to withdraw money, there are certain inputs that you need to put, right? You need to put in your PIN number, you need to put in your card, your PIN number, and the amount and the account that you want to pull from. So those would all be parameters, right? So you can go in there, put in your card, your PIN, your amount, and your account, and it will spit out however much money, right? But another person comes in, they have a different card, they have a different PIN, different account, different amount. It will still do the same thing, but it will be a different result. So that's kind of how you can think of a function. It's just like a machine performing the same actions, but it could have different inputs, which would result into different outputs.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make
Okay,
sense.
cool. Cool,
Um,
perfect.
if statements, I've been having trouble with the if and else statements on my own JavaScript. Um, is
Are you,
making,
are you, go ahead.
I'm sorry, is making an else or else if statement, is it virtually the same as an if statement, like the way it's written out from what I'm seeing?
Yeah, so it's written out the same way. The thing that else if, when you use else if, it's when you are checking a second condition, right? So let's say you're saying, if it's raining outside, bring an umbrella. Else if it's sunny, grab some sunglasses, right? I'm checking two conditions. I could have just done, if it's raining outside, grab an umbrella, else stay inside, something like that. So else if comes into place when you're checking something else, when you are checking another condition.
And the if has to be the big general.
Right. If is just like, if something is true, then I want this to happen. So you could have an if statement all by itself. If you don't want anything else to happen, you just want to check if this thing is happening. And then if that is happening, then I want to perform this action. And then you can just jump into whatever code you want. The only time you use else if is if you need to check something else on top of that. Or if you just use else, that's if you want something else to happen if the original thing turns out to be false.
Okay, that makes sense.
Awesome. All right. Well, do you have any other questions for me? That kind of wraps up the workshop for today.
Not at this time.
Okay. If you do, feel free to message me on Slack. If you need help with your project or you want me to look at something, under your announcements, you can click office hours and sign up for office hours as well. I know you said you had some issues with your project. So if you want to sign up for that, feel free. I have some later today. But this workshop will be recorded and it will be posted on your announcements if you ever want to take a look back at it again.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming today. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me on Slack.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great one.
You as well.
Thanks.